If you are a brand new teacher or you're coming into the school year as a brand new teacher or you're going to teach soon, this video is for you. Hey guys, my name is Yale Bass. I am a former Spanish high school teacher of 5 years, and it's been about 2 or 3 years since I was last in the classroom. And today I'm going to make a confession of my top 9 mistakes, failures, if you want to call them that, from my first year as a teacher. For context, my first school site was through the Teach for America program, and I was placed in Los Angeles teaching mostly Hispanic heritage speakers, Spanish, I believe it was Spanish 2 and Spanish 3, and I did end up teaching a literature honors course the following year. But that is the context. I did work in a high school close to Little Tokyo. So that was my first school site, and I was there for 2 years, and it was a really good school, let me just say that. After doing this reflection, and then I went back to the school site, and I was like, man, I've actually worked at good school sites. Obviously, there are institutional problems and, even personal issues that impede our teaching progress. But anyways, here are my top 9 mistakes. And they are in no order of seriousness or anything like that. So let's just start off with the first one. My first mistake was getting triggered easily. And I went into the classroom as a first-year teacher at age 21. It is crazy how I was so young at that time. It's considering that our brains are not fully developed until we are 25. And so I truly believe, maybe in my case at least, I was still not mature enough to be a teacher, but I was still placed there and they accepted me, but whatever, But I was triggered easily. Like, everything would get me upset, everything would get me mad, and I think this contributed to my mental health deteriorating, and it was more of a personal weakness rather than it was the school site that was damaging my mental health. So I would not blame it on the school site, I would blame it on a personal characteristic flaw that I had at that point. And this is problematic because for some reason, I believe that if you were to appear more authoritative, more angry, raise your voice, that students would actually listen, or that students would be moved to obey you or whatever. But that's just not how it works. And perhaps that was something that came from my childhood, and I was emitting that in the workforce, which is kind of a dangerous thing to do. Okay, let's go with number 2 is not taking care of my health. This is so important, you guys, because as a teacher, you can't just be surviving on coffee after coffee, energy drink after energy drink, going to Jack in the Box every morning, or going to Taco Bell every afternoon. All of that contributes to burnout. And I just remember going to bed at 11 p.m. and waking up at 5 a.m. or even 4 a.m. just to beat traffic. And I easily could have slept earlier. However, I basically would go home at around 5 or 6, just doing work, and then I would come home, eat, shower, maybe shower, you guys. Sometimes I would just do it without the shower. I mean, that's embarrassing to say, but yeah, don't do that. You need to shower every single day. But anyways, and I would, after my shower / eating, I would just go back and do more work and then fall asleep. So basically I was working way more than I was supposed to, way more than 40 hours for sure, at least 60 at least. And on the weekends I would be lesson planning, so more work, and also working on assignments for my credential program. So, and that took a couple of hours, like 3 to 4 hours. So my mental health and physical health, I don't know about my physical health if it was deteriorating. I mean, I was pretty young and pretty resilient, I would say. However, if I could go back, I would take a Sabbath. So one day of the week, and just, whether it be Saturday or Sunday, and just not work and not do any credential program, no assignments, nothing, and just relax. And that's what I would have done. But that's not who I was. I didn't even know about the Sabbath at that time. But looking back, that would have lifted up my spirits probably throughout the week. In fact, people who honor the Sabbath or just rest one day a week live longer. And it's just more, it just lifts up your spirits. And I learned this later in life, but honestly, if you can, just take one day a week and just rest, whether it be honoring the Sabbath, if you're a Christian or a Jew, or not, just take one day a week and just relax, spend time with family, do the things that you love, and praise God, go to church, whatever you need to do on that day, do it, but just don't work. It works wonders. There's definitely a blessing whether you are a believer or a non-believer. And another thing I would do differently, and it goes back to the workload. And I think often we say, oh, we don't have enough time. We actually do have a lot of time. Throughout the day, though, I think we as teachers have a hard time saying no or setting boundaries. And I learned this my last year, my 5th year, and I implemented it, and I actually took no work at all at home. And this is due to me caring less, but also because I had an invisible toolbox every time I went into the classroom, and I kind of knew the motions and didn't have to think twice about some of the things that I would teach. And as a first-year teacher, I remember just like planning to a T, making sure that everything is perfect or whatever. So there was this complex of being perfect at the curriculum level and not knowing what the result would be. So what I would do differently, and please take this advice, try it out and let me know if it works, is put a timer when you are working, when you are lesson planning, whether that be in your prep, and also setting boundaries during your prep period. Because what I noticed is that a lot of other teachers like to come into your prep period for whatever reasons, to socialize, to complain, or to ask a question. But if you can really set those boundaries, put your headphones on, close the door, and if you have a curtain, just close the curtain and just do the lesson planning for whatever, 1 hour, half an hour, and just do what you need to do within that hour. Do not be a lot of times, I remember at my prep period, I would sleep, but mostly because I wouldn't sleep the night before, or because I just crashed from the coffee or whatever. But another thing that you could do is, so that's why it's all interconnected, right? You don't want to be sleeping on your prep period. You actually want to do the work at home so that you don't, do the work at work so that you don't have to bring it home. And so that's what I would do, is don't even think about it. Just kind of be like a robot during your prep so that you can go home and just relax and have downtime. So that's what I would do, is put a timer, no social media during that time, nothing. Just drink your water, drink a lot of water, do what you need to do, and just hyper focus on what you're doing. And then when that timer goes off, you're done with it. Like, you don't add to it, you don't remove anything, you just leave it as is. And I would recommend, if you can, to spend 1 or 2 hours of downtime every night. I know that sounds like a lot, but it will be a blessing for you, whether that be cooking or spending time with your husband or going out for ice cream or doing just something, so that your life is not just work, 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 because that's where burnout happens. And so that's something that I would have done if I could go back, right? Is taking care of my health. That's what I would do. All right, number 3. Not preserving relationships or not cultivating relationships. I mentioned in my previous videos of how important it is to reach out to people, not just your students, but also other colleagues, your neighbor teachers, the office, the administration, literally everybody, the janitors, the cafeteria ladies, like literally build relationships with everybody, because in a school, you need a lot of help. Like if something goes wrong here or if something goes wrong there, you want to know who that person is so that you can reach out to them. And because a lot of times we're like lost and we don't know who to reach out to. And when you have a relationship with that person, it's a lot easier for them to help you or you to help them, whatever the case is. So building relationships with every single person that you meet. And I feel like I did not do this my first year, and I wish I would have. It's just sometimes you get caught up in the teaching world that you only think about your own little circle, but when you start to expand that, I feel like that actually helps with your mental health. And I noticed this my last year as a teacher, my 4th and 5th year as a teacher. I started to expand more. I started to talk to people more. But anyways, that's my thing. Relationships is key to being successful in this career. Seriously, big time. Okay, the next one is not breaking down information. And I think this can apply to all teachers in different content areas. As a first year teacher, I especially considering that it was high school, I felt like I did not need to break down the information, but you still need to break down the information. And I learned that really quick. I remember assigning something and I thought I was clear on the instructions and I got the results back and everyone failed, and I could only point the finger to myself, and I realized I had not broken down the information. I literally had to learn how to be a teacher on the spot. And remember, I'm Teach for America. I didn't have any experience in the classroom besides City Year. I did that for a whole year, but that's a little different. I never really had the position of an actual educator but anyways, I basically was learning on the spot. I learned about exemplars. I learned about modeling and narration and all these other techniques that I did not have in my toolbox. I felt like I went into the classroom with no toolbox and I was setting up myself for failure. And anyways, I actually don't think Teach for America should exist, or it should exist, but with certain adjustments to the program, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. The next mistake is not being involved in the community of the school site. And I actually lived about an hour away, well actually 30 minutes away from my school site, but it took an hour commute because LA. And so I was just bombarded with everything that I didn't even have a chance to get to know LA or downtown LA. We were in downtown LA near Little Tokyo, and just a small school nestled in the neighborhoods, the surrounding neighborhoods. And I wish I would have branched out and, went to the library or recreational centers if there are any, or any restaurants, or literally just expand and get to know the community and really maybe build relationships with people over there. And that way I can get connected and connect my students with the rest of the community. And I think this is important because it lets students, especially high school students, to be in touch with their surrounding areas and how they can help the community and be contributing members of the community, whatever that looked like in downtown LA. And and possibly make a field trip out of it, but I never did that. And so it's unfortunate that that's how the things played out my first year. But maybe for you, take a moment, maybe a weekend or two, and go and visit the different areas of the community. Talk to people, go to the restaurants and see what they're like. Be observant, and because you can really tell. You can learn a lot about your students by the surrounding area. And it's quite interesting because a lot of the students will be very surprised when you mention a restaurant or a particular area in the community that you actually went to. And I noticed this at my second school site, because I actually lived in the community, and so I would go to all these places. And so it was interesting because they would, let me know of a restaurant recommendation or whatever, and it was fun. So I lived like maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes away from my second school site. So that's something that I would have done. Maybe live nearby instead of living like 30 minutes or 40 minutes away, which is what most teachers do. And usually, especially if you're a teacher from America, I think it's very common to live far away from your school site because you don't want to come across your students, or perhaps it's not as nice as you grew up or whatever, but it is quite nice, and you get acquainted with the type of folks that live in that community. And it's not always dangerous, you guys. Sometimes just because it's low income and there's black and brown people doesn't mean that it's dangerous, you know. I think the default is that, oh, it must be ghetto, it's dangerous, but sometimes it's not like that. I know sometimes it is like that, but you know. Okay, the next one is not enjoying the teaching process. And I think this is fair because I was making mistakes left and right, and I couldn't see the what is it called? The light at the end of the tunnel. Like, I couldn't see it, and I was in a sleep deprived, depressed mood most of the time. And I think that's why I didn't truly enjoy it, and I just wanted to get out as soon as I could. And it was just that year went by really fast, and it was not pleasant at all. I don't even remember a pleasant moment that I had at that school. And I mean, that's unfortunate, but I wish I would have taken care of my health, gotten in touch more, build relationships with the school members and the community members. All of those things probably would have contributed to a more pleasant experience at my school site. But because I didn't do those things, I didn't enjoy the teaching process. And you know, at my second school site, I actually found pleasure. I actually found joy while I was teaching. And I think it has a lot to do with the environment, right? And also my commute was shorter. So I think it's important, especially as a first year, or if you're thinking of being a teacher, just look at all those factors. You know, having a shorter commute is important. It's like number one, right? If you're like 15, 10, even 20 minutes, I think is okay. With traffic, like, that's amazing. More than that, like, I wouldn't even accept a school offer. I wouldn't even go interview with a school that far, because it's just the dread of going and coming back. It was too much for me, especially you're just dealing with traffic for 1 whole hour, actually 2 whole hours every single day. It's just, it got too much. And so, but the teaching process itself, and actually smiling at your students and letting students and having a more positive demeanor, that's what I wish I would have done my first year. But for some reason I was influenced, or in my brain I just thought that the more strict, the more serious that you are, like, the more students will respect you. But I actually found the contrary. My demeanor, my 4th and 5th year, yes, I had structures, I had systems and routines and all of that stuff, but I did it with a smile. I didn't do it with a resting BA face, you know. Like, I did it with a smile, and I made sure that I practice positive reinforcement with all students, not just the good ones, but also when the bad ones, or the ones who make most bad decisions, when they actually do it, like, also reinforce that behavior. And I didn't have issues, you guys. So there's just some things that I've learned throughout. Okay, the next one is not having grace over myself, or for myself. And this is, I mean, like I mentioned, I made a lot of mistakes, and I think this happens to more people than often, not just in the teaching workplace, but also in other workplaces, where you make a mistake and you beat yourself up for it because you think that your value comes from your performance. But you're still important even if you make mistakes, just because you're a human being. Like, you have value just for existing. So there's nothing that you can do that will make you more valuable. That's just like a social construct. So what I'm trying to say is that I wish I would have had grace, and because once I had more grace for myself for the mistake, it was easier to bounce back. But when I'm dwelling in my mistake, it just takes longer, and it just bogs you down, and you're unable to bounce back as easily. And I will attribute to the making mistakes to the fact that in Teach for America, you don't have any education preparation. There is 1 month where you do go into a classroom and you be a teacher for summer school, but that's literally it. It's just 1 month. And honestly, there needs to be some reformation in the Teach for America program, or have like a prerequisite of having experience in the classroom. I don't know if it's changed. I mean, it's been a long time since then, but yeah, let me know in the comments if you're Teach for America now and if things have changed, what are the requirements. And I sometimes, I mean, I don't know if I should say this online, but sometimes I do regret having gone through Teach for America. But that was all part of God's plan, so no regrets, right? But if I could go back, I would do it a little bit more, I would do it differently. The next one has more to do with my content area, which was Spanish. And my mistake here was not emphasizing language development. And the reason why this is kind of like bizarre, because isn't a foreign language, aren't you supposed to teach students language development? Yes and no. When it comes to Hispanic heritage speakers, so those who speak Spanish already, they already have they can have a conversation in Spanish. Their parents speak Spanish, their community speaks Spanish. It's a little different for them. And what I noticed as a teacher is a lot of them can speak it. A lot of them refuse to speak it, or they just, they feel ashamed, or they just feel like it's not good enough for them to speak. And what I noticed also is that their writing, they lack vocabulary, they lack spelling mistakes and grammar and all these other things. Even when they speak, they had problems with grammar. And to be honest, when I was 21, I thought I knew Spanish. And once I started to teach it, I was like, oh, I need a lot of Spanish education myself. And so even in my content area, I was lacking. So it was a mixture of just terrible things, and it went downhill really fast. But thankfully, with time and experience, I became more confident in my content area and became more passionate about it. Actually, at this particular school site, teaching Hispanic heritage speakers meant to not focus. They actually asked us to do more social justice curriculum, more on history of Spanish, more history of the revolution, the Mexican Revolution, Latin America, indigenous communities, like all of this stuff was emphasized, and I got curriculum that dealt with that information, and like the Aztecs and the Mayans and all of these other things. So I was presenting that to them. And another aspect of this is we had to emphasize, or we had to teach students how to critically analyze in Spanish. And so that was a heavy push at our school site, and mostly because it was a charter school, it's a college prep school. But if I could go back, I would probably push back a little on the critical analysis, because kids are already struggling to critically analyze in English. What makes you think that they will be successful if they're doing it in a foreign language, in a language that they don't even hear it at school, and they spend more time at school than they do at home? So that's what I would have done differently, because in my 4th and 5th year, I believe that I emphasized a mixture, not just social justice or history, but also language development. And I focused more on conversation. And I think kids enjoyed it more because they felt that it was valuable, that they need to practice actually articulating their words and when they speak and preparing them for AP Spanish. And so it was a little bit different. And I'm so sorry if you are a student or a former student of mine at my first school site. I'm so sorry. I was a bad teacher, and I did the best that I could, but there were just so many factors that led to what I would teach at the school site. So that's something that I wish I would have done differently, is more language development, because they need that. Just because they're Hispanic heritage speakers does not mean that they are just fluent in Spanish and they can critically analyze and read Spanish. Like, that's just not how it works, because we live in the United States. Everybody speaks English here, and if they're not speaking Spanish in an academic setting besides that one classroom. And so I would have pushed back a little bit there. But I know critically analysis is important for the college prep world, but it's a little different. It should be treated a little differently in foreign language classes. Okay, the last one is I cared way too much. Now, this might sound bizarre considering that, aren't you supposed to care? Yes, but I think there comes a point where you care about your students, you care about the families and your work and everything, but when you care about it more than your own family, let's say, or just your own mental health, or at the expense of your mental health, then that's when it becomes a problem. And I want to attribute this to the pressure that you might experience in a charter school. And a lot of charter schools are college prep, and there does exist a certain pressure that you might not experience in a public school. And I can tell you this because I remember interviewing for a public school, and I did like a tour of their classes and stuff. And these kids were so laid back. The teachers were just completely laid back too, and they were just happier too. And they had relationships with their students. It was a total different experience. But at the charter schools, it's very strict. It's very, like, you have to have a certain standard in every classroom, and they're just like on the teachers. I mean, it pays really well, but they're just on top of it. And perhaps if you're a parent watching, you want your teachers to not be so laid back. You want your teachers to actually teach. But I think there needs to be this balance and meet in the middle where you can have a joyful career, but at the same time have it structured and have policies that make sense for both teachers and the students and that are fair and just. But there were times where I cared way too much if a student disobeyed, or if a student like didn't do homework or something. I just cared too much, and I got triggered easily. It goes back to my first point. I think because I cared so much, and I think it comes from like the pressure from your superiors. At least for me, it was that. And there were just times where I could not keep up with the pressure, and especially with my mental health at that point, it was really bad. And I just remember somebody from administration coming into my classroom and checking on this bulletin board that I had to elaborate on something. I forgot what it was, but mine was just bare bones. Seriously, just bare bones, but I did the minimum. I did it. I had it up there. And he comes in and tells me, he just starts criticizing it, and it just tells me like, you're supposed to be doing this, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is not a good job, and it doesn't reflect the school, whatever. I don't remember verbatim, but essentially I just heard that it was just like an attack almost. And I think I responded very similarly. That's another mistake. I should never speak to, a superior in that way. And I feel bad because I never apologized. And I know there was another point where I think he expected me to apologize because of something I said to him in front of a bunch of students. But the point is that I never apologized, and I feel so bad. And if you're watching, you know who you are. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I was so young and immature, and I just felt like I made so many mistakes, even not just like in the classroom level, but also like in my relationships with people at that school. Even though I did have good relationships with some of you guys, it was fun. But little did that person know that I was going through a mental crisis and I was depressed and just surviving off of coffee and 6 hours every day and literally just surviving and depressed most days, and I just, he didn't know any of that, obviously. I mean, I'm not going to share that information. He never asked who I was or anything like that. So these are just a few mistakes that I made as a first year teacher, and I hope that this is helpful to at least one person, because if I would have watched this video my first year or even like before it might have helped, you know. So the big thing is take care of yourself mentally, physically, because if you cannot do that, then it's just going to be a time of misery. And right now, more than ever, is important to take care of your health while you're teaching, before you're teaching. Take a day off every week to decompress and be in tune with yourself or with God or whoever you believe in. And yeah, let me know if this is helpful in any way. Put in the comments which mistake, if you're a teacher, which one of these mistakes resonates the most with you, and which one of these are you going to not do. But anyways, if this was helpful, please give this a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more videos, more content like this. And yeah, I'll see you later. Bye.